All right, I think that's probably, oh, no. Max Rubin is having a real tough time getting in here, but come on, Max, we believe. All right, why don't we go ahead and get started? So it's pretty surreal to be chatting with our first class of r/advertising school. Thank you guys so much for applying, for the positive feedback on the subreddit. It's really awesome to see people become so active in that community, because it's 100,000 people all like here to like make the industry better, and finally I think we're starting to deliver on that. Obviously today is a day when we have a lot going on in the world, and as we kind of mentioned before, if this is something that you find yourself really struggling to focus on things that once seemed big but now don't seem so big, please feel free to catch up on the lecture when it's recorded and posted to YouTube. Don't feel pressured to be here if you don't feel like you can focus right now, and we totally understand that. So obviously, like, no points against you. We have a really awesome speaker here today who has a ton of valuable insight for us, like for all of us. I'm very excited to hear from Jim. Not only experience in big agencies and leading big creative teams, but also building his own agency, which I think is super impressive. Before we kick it over to Jim, I just want to introduce the rest of the r/advertising school team. So my name is Joe Federer. I worked for Reddit for about 4 years, building a team called Brand Strategy there. And now I'm out on my own doing the freelance thing, which has been a blast. Dan, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hey, I'm Dan. I work at Goodby Silverstein. I've worked at a few agencies, McCann, Arnold, Gray. And we're really excited to kind of have all of you guys. There were like a ton of applicants. You guys are super qualified. And again, we want to invite everyone to participate. So just know if you have friends or partners that want to work. Really excited for this. We have a really great roster of folks. I know that we haven't announced that. That will go on the website. But just to, Jim is fucking awesome. We're really excited to have him. We also have, executive design directors at Gray. We have art director, associate creative directors from Goodby. We have film director from Tool, which is a great production company. More folks from Truth and Consequences, folks that have worked at RGA, Wyden. I think this is gonna be really great. I'm really excited to have you along for these next 12 weeks. And I'll pass it off to Edward and Neha.
Cool.
Hey guys.
Hey. I'm Edward. I'm an art director at Goodby Silverstein. Yeah.
I'm Neha. I'm an art director at Goodby as well. Yeah. So excited that you guys are here. This is great.
It's nice to see everyone's faces. I think, Dan and Joe kind of covered everything, but yeah.
Sorry, we stole your thunder, Ed and Neha.
Good.
No, the four of us have been working behind the scenes to kind of bring this thing to life for the last couple months, and it's awesome to kind of be here in front of you guys. I think without further ado, Jim, it would be awesome to hear from you and what we can do to build up our portfolios and resumes.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, guys. Just to say hello to everyone. I wish we were meeting under better circumstances, but I'm Jim Walls, and I am a partner at Truth and Consequences in Philadelphia. We're a relatively new agency. We're only about 7 months old, but we were founded by partners of an agency known as 160/90, which is now owned by Endeavor. About an 800-person shop with offices around the world. I was the chief creative officer there. I was there for about 15 years, so saw it go from an agency that was very small, about 20 people, up into the big sort of international juggernaut that it is today. But now we're off to smaller and what I believe to be better things at Truth and Consequences. We are an employee-owned shop. We are really focused on hiring the best talent we can get. Paying fewer people more is kind of our model. and serving a small group of clients. So we have every intention of keeping this model very boutique, and really getting back to the heart of what I always enjoyed as a person in the business, which was serving clients directly. So, of course, in the scope of building up an agency of that size, we had to hire a lot of people. And one of the things that I always took great pride in was hand selecting people to work within the agency. I thought that was a real secret to our success. And as Chief Creative Officer, probably half, I would say more than half of my job, and what I considered to be the most important part of my job, was interviewing, seeking out talent, hiring talent, because I knew that if I hired great people, the agency would succeed. And that definitely paid off over the years. Now, when we would put out a call for a copywriter or a designer, let's say, we would typically get in maybe 350 portfolios, and we would look through each and every one of them. Now, I'd like to say that we spent an hour with all of them, but the reality is when you get that many and you have so many open positions, you have to move quickly. So I very quickly kind of developed systems in how to evaluate candidates and especially evaluate their portfolios. And, a couple of caveats before I really jump in. One, I'm one creative director. Every creative director is going to have their own personal peccadillos, their own opinions about what they're looking for in portfolios or resumes. I certainly have my own idiosyncrasies. So any advice that I give you may not apply across the board. The other thing I'll say is, I know everybody comes from a lot of diverse backgrounds. I don't know personally where each of you have come from, so I'll try to keep things really broad, but hopefully in the Q&A, if you have some specific questions, we can get into that. But I'm assuming many of you, if you were like me at the start of my career, are looking to maybe find your path into this industry, how to take that next step within the industry. And, I can tell you that your portfolio is going to be more important than anything else that you have in either getting that first foot in the door or making your next move. So with that, I will bring up a presentation. It's not really a presentation. It's really just some slides to kind of keep me on track. But, here's our intro slide. So first thing I wanted to talk about is, really what is a portfolio? My background in this industry was kind of non-traditional, which I imagine would be the same for a lot of you. I was a first-generation college student. I studied English. I studied journalism when I was in school. When I got out in the mid-90s, tried to get a job in journalism, and it was when, the entire journalism industry was crashing. So I got a job as a writer at TV Guide magazine, which has since been replaced by that button on your remote control with your program guide. But at the time, it was the #1 weekly magazine in the country. I was the music writer there. And, quickly knew that I saw the writing on the wall and figured I had to find a new path for myself. And I really wanted to write. A friend of mine mentioned to me that copywriting might be a good route. And I had literally had no idea what copywriting was. I thought a copywriter was somebody who filled out the legal forms to have things copyrighted, right? So the little circle C that you see next to things. And I thought it was like a paralegal or something like that. And, I said, well, I really don't know anything about that. And do I have to go to law school? And, she kind of scratched her head and she was like, no, you write ads. And I said, well, I work for TV Guide. I study media. I study pop culture. That's probably something that I could do, but I didn't know what my path was. And her suggestion was, well, you need to make a portfolio. I said, okay, well, let me take a shot at it. Luckily, at the time, my girlfriend, now wife, happened to be a graphic designer. And I just sat down, I started writing ads, and at night she would help me design them and actually help me build a portfolio. And once I had that portfolio, I just started looking up local agencies and, got my portfolio in front of them. And luckily somebody was desperate enough and hired me. And, that was my entry into the industry. Of course, back in those days, and this is going to make me sound like 1,000 years old and talk about the golden days of advertising, but in those days, you literally had, this was your portfolio. This was actually my wife's college portfolio that she came out with. And it's it's probably 50 pounds. It's a heavy case. It's got, boards in here with things that are spray mounted to it, all of her work. And you would take this to agencies, you would go to the front desk, you would drop it off and say, here's my work, I'm looking for a job. And invariably, you wouldn't hear from anybody. A month would go by, and then you would show back up and say, hey, I dropped something off. Is it possible that I can pick it up? And, I've heard horror stories about creative directors actually just throwing portfolios in the trash because they, their offices got crammed and they thought nobody was going to pick them up, and throwing away people's life's work. So luckily that system has been replaced. Here was one of the good things about being an agency owner is you don't really need to have a portfolio anymore. It's kind of your website now at this point. But this was the last portfolio I had created probably 15 years ago, a little bit smaller format, but I literally still have, this is the first ad that I ever created. First thing I ever wrote that day when somebody said, do you want to be a copywriter? And it's an ad for, it's for Martin Guitars. And it says, if you want a better guitar, you'll have to go to hell. And it was a story about Robert Johnson, made a deal with the devil at the crossroads in order to sell his soul. I don't even think he played a Martin. I think he played a Gibson. But, creative license when you're 23 years old and trying to get a job. But that was the first thing I wrote. And, I think it was one of the things that helped me get a job. It wasn't designed well. I don't, want to tell my wife that, but we slapped it together. And, I actually had the pleasure of showing that to Chris Martin at Martin Guitars when we were working on the account years later. And he's like the 8th generation owner of the guitar company. And I think he was, slightly horrified by it. But it was fun to kind of share that with him and say, this was the first campaign I ever worked on. So, that was, of course, my route. And, I knew how important a portfolio was at that time. But really want to talk about, for those of you who are embarking on building your portfolio or, have the makings of one, what is a portfolio now? And, of course, the reality is everything's digital. It has been for a very long time. When we would put out those calls for jobs, like I said, we would get hundreds of them in. And, when it came to looking at online portfolios, one of the most important things for me was how quickly can I get to the work, right? Because when you have hundreds of people to sift through, will that link send me right to the work? How quickly can I look through it? How quickly can I scan the campaigns that you've worked on and make a snap decision on whether or not you have at least the basic skills to do this job? If that was the case, as a creative director, I would take that and I would put it in sort of the second sift, right? Because the reality is so many applications we would get, there would be people applying for maybe a graphic design position and they have no background in design and they've never designed an ad and they've never, they've never gone into Adobe Creative Suite. So, the first thing you have to do is figure out, does this person at least have the basic skills to do this job? Personally, my point of view is I wouldn't care if you graduated high school. it all comes down to your work. And can your work convey an idea? Does it have intelligence in it? Does it have insight? Are you showing the insight into the customer that you can persuade them and talk about this product in a meaningful way to that person? So really what it came down to, it was all about that, you know, when looking at work. The other thing I would look for is, does this work across mediums? Does it work in print? Does it work in digital? Does it work in, you know, maybe outdoor? Does it work in an activation campaign? You know, I think about 10 years ago, people started calling this omni-channel. But the reality is, it's like, is this an idea that can work as well in a TV spot as it can on a billboard? And that's a sign that it's a good idea and that it has legs, right? So that's another thing that I'm looking for in the work. For copywriting, you know, Luke Sullivan wrote a famous book about this called Hey Whipple, Squeeze This. For copywriters, it's not about how good the idea looks. It's about how well is it written, right? Is it a good idea, and is the writing good? I don't care what it looks like. I'm not judging you on your design style. I'm really judging you on the quality of the idea. Now, if you've been at an agency for several years and your work is still stick figures and line drawings and things that you did in MS Paint, you know, then I may question your ability to actually sell good work in and get it produced. So, you know, that's just one thing to keep in mind. Question people ask a lot is, how many things should you have in your portfolio? Simple answer to that is, of course, enough to get you the job. But I really think it comes down to 3 or 4 campaigns at a minimum, and not a whole lot more than that. Creative directors really aren't going to have a ton of time to go through 20 campaigns of work. They're really only able to go through a few. I think a good creative director can tell just based on that whether or not you have the chops and whether or not you can make the next round, which is you know, an online conversation or a face-to-face meeting in order to evaluate your body of work. And you know, that's usually an opportunity to show things beyond what you might show in your online portfolio. One of the things that I tell aspiring creatives especially is to not try and pick the most high profile clients in the world, the clients that do the best advertising that you've ever seen. I've seen designers come in with ads that they've developed for Apple, and I've seen copywriters come in with ideas that they've developed for Nike. And I'm not necessarily judging their work against the other candidates. I'm now judging it against some of the best work that's ever been done, right? So if your Apple ad is not up to the quality of the Apple ad that is actually produced and out there in the world, I'm going to wonder if you have the ability to work at that level of quality, right? So that's important. The other resource, which I know many of you use already, is Reddit, of course. And all the time we see people on there. You know, I think there's a popular thread right now of somebody asking people to destroy his portfolio. You know, that's a great resource, not only to get feedback on the work that you're doing, but also to find people to help you. You know, if you're a copywriter, you can source designers, and you know, maybe just like the Secret Santa, you know, offer something to them in return for helping to lay out an ad for you. You know, vice versa, if you're a designer that just needs a copywriter to come to you with some ideas to generate, you know, I know plenty of writers out there that'll work for a case of beer. So, you know, it's just one of those resources that's great to use if you think that you can't make a portfolio on your own, or you don't have a close network of friends that can then help you do that. So that's a little about what is a portfolio. I just want to talk a little bit about who needs a portfolio. I'm a firm believer that everybody who gets into this business, whether it's a branding agency, a marketing firm, an ad agency, even going in-house, I think everybody should have a portfolio. If you were involved in the work, as an account manager, as a production designer, as a strategist, you had a role in bringing that job to life. I would often say a strategist is doing just as much work as a copywriter oftentimes, sometimes more. And if that strategist is not doing a great job, the campaign's not going to be great. Or if it is, it's kind of great by accident, right? The copywriter just kind of hit on an insight and got lucky, and the work hit pay dirt. But I believe that, no matter who you are, any campaign that you work on, you should collect it. You should put it on a website. You should put it on Instagram, show the world, and be proud of the fact that, you had a role in this. I can tell you that that's not necessarily the case. So if you're looking for a job outside of the creative sector, if you don't want to be an art director, or if you don't want to be a motion graphics artist, but you want to take one of the more account focused roles within an agency, having a portfolio is going to give you an amazing leg up over all the other candidates out there. Because I can tell you very few of them have a portfolio to show. All the account directors and executives I've worked with over the years, I've encouraged them when we get done a campaign, file it away, because when you go to that next job, it's just going to help you. I think that kind of covers off on who needs a portfolio. Let's really just dive in and I think look at a couple of examples from some of the best people I've worked with over the years, just to give you a basic sense of what a simple portfolio can look like. I want to start with designer. I know some of you may follow him, Jay Fletcher, who's in Charleston, South Carolina. Great logo and identity designer. I don't believe, and this isn't a cut on Jay, but I don't believe he even maintains his regular website anymore. Almost everybody finds him through Instagram. So if you want to follow him, he's JPEG Fletcher on Instagram. And, very just simple, clean Instagram page of his identity work. And he obviously does beautiful work, occasionally has, pictures of his family in there, but anybody who wants to hire him is usually going to hire him off of this, for the type of work that he does. And I think he's done work from, everybody from SNL to some of you may have seen his stamps that he designed for the Postal Service a couple of years ago. So really for many people, your portfolio doesn't have to be much more than an Instagram page. You don't have to delve too deep into creating a custom site. This can be a great profile of your work. Another more illustrator-focused designer is somebody that I used to work with, Mikey Burton, when I was at 160 over 90. Mikey does a lot of not just straight up design for brands, but he does illustrations for the New York Times, the New Yorker magazine, beer labels, certainly well known in circles. He's originally out of Ohio. But again, as you can see, just a simple presentation of his work. Now, of course, clicking into it, you can get a little bit deeper view and then scroll through it. Now, this is somebody who's, not necessarily showing a lot of campaigns in his work. Now, I just went full screen. It's going to screw everything up. There we go. But, just more somebody who's focused on just showing you the diversity of his design. Another designer who I love is Kelly Dorsey. I'm probably going to misrepresent some of these people, but I think she most recently was at Second Story in Atlanta. Also came through Digital Kitchen in Chicago. She's done, she is a creative director that did a lot of her work as an art director and a designer. So she's going to be featuring more campaigns. So this was, some work that she did for anthropology, in web design, motion design, for various campaigns throughout the years. And, this is just, I think, a good example of showing somebody who, did work across one brand and, what that can look like in specifically a designer's portfolio. Just to bring up another one, this is Tim Goff. He's actually one of our designers at Truth and Consequences, a senior designer there. He bills himself under Dirty Hand Studio. So not only does he feature his work, but he also sells merchandise on his page out of his shop. So, again, to go through some of the work that we developed together on the Philadelphia Eagles, he was one of the designers on the Eagles campaign for a number of years, and was also producing video work, television work. This is a good example of, like I said, the omni-channel campaign of showing what work looks like on a bus or in outdoor, in digital, just showing one idea and how it can be executed a lot of different places. Now, perfect example of work that, as somebody who's just out of school, it's really tough to show something like this, right? Because a lot of this is real work and it's been produced. Again, as a creative director, if I'm looking at something like a bus wrap, I'm not judging this designer on whether or not that's real. I'm really judging it on, how well did they use the medium? Does it convey an idea? And even if it's mocked up, even if it's literally been photoshopped onto that bus, that's really what I'm judging. Okay. This is another one of our designers, Nick Vicente. Nick, and one of the things I wanted to mention too is that a lot of these designers are not using, sites that they've completely coded themselves. Of course, if you're a digital designer, if you're a UX designer, you probably want to build your own and to showcase your work. But in a lot of these cases, these designers are using Cargo, they're using Squarespace. In Nick's case, he's using, I wasn't familiar with this tool, but I think it's called Semplice, Semplice, in order to build his site. And again, you can see that with an off-the-shelf tool, he's creating a site that looks really professional. Nick's a younger designer. Some of this work that he has in his portfolio may even be some student work that he's still mixing in with some of his professional work. Some of it can be more conceptual than others. This is an identity system for SpaceX that he came up with. So, again, just showing a great system as a campaign within one designer's portfolio. He also showcases things like art installations and things that he's done. So just expressing himself in different mediums. I'm sure if you guys have spent any time on copywriters' pages, on any creatives' pages, you've seen about pages. I do think that, when you get into info, bring that up, you can read more about Nick. This is an important thing to have, just to give people a little sense of personality. Somebody I think asked a question on Reddit a day or two ago. Should I have a picture of myself on my portfolio? And it doesn't hurt, to put a name to a face. It starts to give people insight into who you are. But it's also, you're not trying to tell your whole life story here. It's really about giving people an introduction to who you are. If you're on, I lost my window there for a second. Am I still sharing? Or did I jump out?
Nope, you're not sharing right now.
All right. Sorry, I just clicked off the window and that completely blew everything away. I really did lose it. This has to happen once in every Zoom meeting. I apologize.
That wouldn't be a live lecture if we didn't have one of these.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I'm just going to go to I'm going to share desktop and do it that way. You still see it again?
Yep, modern copywriter.
Awesome. All right, yeah, we're a modern copywriter. So, anybody who's an aspiring writer, but even if you want to get a sense of what great work looks like, this is a terrific resource. Modern Copywriter has been publishing for years. I mean, you can go back into their archive. These are all, different agencies that they've been featured on. But yeah, you've got 11 years of portfolios up on this site from copywriters. This is one of our partners, Brendan Quinn, was featured on there. And you're going to see a lot of similar things in a copywriter's page. So, just
also teaching a class. He'll also be teaching a class.
Yeah, he's actually teaching one of the copywriter classes. Brendan did a lot of that Eagles work that you saw earlier. He has done work with Nike and Under Armour. But Modern Copywriter is a great resource to check this work out. Another copywriter is Cara Smith. And Cara is a more design-centric writer. That's one of the things, too, I would look at in a copywriter's portfolio is, how well do they mesh with design or an art director? How visual can their work be? And Cars does a great job of that. A job doesn't always have to be just writing, but here's work that she did for Notre Dame that was based on a toy that Charles and Ray Eames created called the House of Cards, and it was kind of a toy that aspiring college students could use, and a puzzle for them to build this emulation of the tower at Notre Dame, which is part of her work. I talked a bit about motion graphics designers. This is Chris Lee, who's an independent motion graphics designer. Love Chris, but again, if you have a portfolio like Chris, your work is going to need to be much more visual. If any of you saw the Bill Murray Stories documentary, Chris designed all the title sequences for it. Again, he's not getting too fancy. He uploaded all of his work to Vimeo and is featuring it there with just links to all of it. So I won't play these things down, but just give you a sense, of course, of what directors and motion graphic designers have to show. So just jumping back to the things I wanted to talk about as well. So I know how much time do we have, Joe?
You could get for another 5-10.
Cool. I did want to spend a little bit of time on the resume, right? Because even though it seems a little outmoded these days, especially with LinkedIn, where all the nerds hang out, LinkedIn is pretty much everybody's resume these days, but it's still professional to have a well-done resume. And it was always something that I would look at, right after I looked at the work, I would take a quick scan of the resume. A couple of things that, again, were kind of my personal rules about resume. It should be one page. right? I just got a resume today from somebody who graduated from school maybe a week ago. The resume is 3 pages long, and it includes a waitressing job at Applebee's. It includes babysitting. It's got everything and anything and everything in that resume, and it's longer than my resume. I still, to this day, even though I own a shop, I don't necessarily need a resume, but I do keep it updated in case my partner decides to get rid of me. My resume is 1 page. A lot of people say, well, if you get 20 years experience, is it okay to put more in there? You can. I don't know if anybody's going to read it, quite honestly. And especially in the business that we're in, it's all about communication. And oftentimes it's about distilling an idea down into something that's concise. And, I don't care how long your career is. If you can distill that down into a single page, it shows me that you can do your job. If any of you, especially designers, know Edward Tufte and follow and have read any of his information design books, one of the famous things he said was, somebody can fit their entire life. Everybody should be able to fit their entire life story on an 11 by 17 piece of paper. But that was his basic idea. You should be able to sum up anything on 1 piece of paper, and that should certainly apply to you. So that's kind of one thing.
Hey Jim, there's a little bit of feedback coming. I don't know if anything changed on your mic, but I think there's a little bit of feedback coming from you now.
Yeah.
If there's nothing you can do about it, don't worry about it. It's not terrible.
Yeah, let me just try something real quick. Any better?
Slightly.
Slightly better. Okay. Sorry. One of the things I also tell people, especially early in their career, is, look, I know you're going to job hop. Having, 7 jobs in 4 years isn't necessarily a great thing. I'm going to invest a lot of time and a lot of money in hiring you and training you and mentoring you. And if I think that you're only going to stick around for 6 months or 8 months, I'm going to question whether or not I should make that investment. That's not to say that you should stay at every job you have for 15 years. But, you have to find that line between, sticking around at a place long enough to give it a chance, right? And, also knowing when it's time to move on, right? And look, everybody will tell you if you want more money and you want to move up quickly, you do that by switching jobs. But you just have to be careful with it because it can be a red flag on your resume. And just because you had a job doesn't mean it needs to be on your resume. I don't think it's necessarily being dishonest. If, maybe there was something that only lasted a couple of months and it was just a bad fit for both sides, maybe you don't include it, right? But just one of those things to keep in mind. Big thing for copywriters, for me, is typos, right? As a creative, as anybody in this business, you're expected to be perfect in your work. Anybody who's been in the industry for any period of time has horror stories about something that went to print that had a typo in it, and they had to pay $60,000 to have it reprinted because the client demanded an error to be fixed. If I'm hiring you, I want to know that I'm not going to run into those situations with my client. And I expect a certain level of polish and a certain level of professionalism in the work that you do. So, if you're not a good proofreader of your own work, get other eyes on it. Get other people to look at it. Beat it up. Because if it gets to me and, I'm looking at your resume and it's got 2 or 3 typos in it, it's not to say I'm going to toss it aside, but, I'm probably going to have questions. I'm a stickler on it. I used to be a proofreader, so that's, I'm kind of a grammar snob when it comes to those types of things. Other things that I don't think you need to include in your resume, which are kind of outdated. A lot of people put in the software that they've learned while they were in college. I don't need to know that you know Microsoft Office. I'm probably never going to ask you to make an Excel spreadsheet. PowerPoints, okay, great. But, unless you're if you're a designer, I'm going to assume you know those tools. If you work in video, I'm going to assume you know After Effects and Final Cut and things like that. So you don't have to list that you're proficient in them. The other thing to me that just always kind of makes me chuckle a little bit is when people call themselves award-winning. I think anybody who works in this business for about 6 hours ends up getting an award of some type. So everybody's award-winning. So yes, if you've won some of the top awards out there, it's certainly worth showing. But at a certain point, everybody in this business has awards. So, it kind of goes without saying anymore at this point. Last thing I really wanted to touch on is, how to get noticed. There's a lot of talk these days about being your own personal brand. Of course, using those social media tools to promote your work is important. But people also ask, how do I break through in this business? A lot of agencies hire people through headhunters, right? Again, I don't want to sound too biased, but my biggest concern was always that if somebody needed to go through a headhunter, are they necessarily that good that, where else they'd be able to find a job on their own? So headhunters or recruiters, not to say that we wouldn't use them, but, it was under abnormal circumstances. Yes, just applying through the normal channels. A lot of people, run into kind of those walls where you have to go online and fill out those long forms and upload PDFs and everything else. That's a really tough system to get your work noticed in. And a lot of times it's got to go through several gatekeepers in HR or somebody who, aren't necessarily the most adept at judging good work. So that might not always be the best route either. You might get discounted just because you're somebody who's right out of school or somebody that has minimal experience. The best way to get noticed is to try to make connections and relationships with people within that agency. Reach out to them personally, reach out to your networks, try to get your work in front of them, ask them for a critique. One of the best techniques I ever saw was a copywriter who's been now working for 20 years. He came to me and he said, Jim, I know I don't really have much work in my portfolio, but I'll work for you for free for 3 months. And, if I'm no good, send me packing. Otherwise, I'd love to prove that I can do it. Not everybody can work for free for 3 months. But, he was a guy that came in. I loved his attitude, and I think I hired him within a week because I knew he could do the job. So, sometimes a little stunt like that can work. Stunts can also backfire. We've all heard these cliches and stories about people sending a door frame to an agency with a fake boot in it, saying just trying to get my foot in the door. Stunts like that, it's a fine line between doing something that's funny and something that gets you noticed and something that kind of becomes a little bit of a legendary joke around the agency, and people that will take pictures of it, share it with other people in the business and say, can you believe what this person did? So, you're running a risk if you're going to try to do something that gets you a little bit too much attention. One of the worst examples I ever saw was it was an art director who sent me a kit that was in emergency break glass. I didn't know what it was, and it was sent in a FedEx mailer. And I was talking with somebody. I was opening my mail. I reached in to see what it was. I immediately knew something was wrong. There was plate glass in there that had shattered. So the entire FedEx bag was filled with shards of glass that I reached my hand into, and could have been an awful situation. It was immediately thrown in the trash. So, that art director, it obviously backfired on them. And hopefully they got a job somewhere at some point. They didn't try that with other agencies. So, hopefully that gives you some insight into, kind of how I look at portfolios, how I look at resumes, as it relates to the truth and consequences. Like I said, we're small. We're only 9 people at this point. But one of the things, just as sort of a shameless plug, I wanted to hit you guys with is, we talked this morning, and we know it's a very awful time for people in the industry on multiple levels, especially for those of you who are in school and may have had a great internship lined up in-house or at a big agency, or something that you may have aspired to be your dream job, and that may have gone away. Some of you may be recent graduates, and you're looking at the job market right now and thinking, like, do I have a shot anywhere? We all are used to this format right now, but we decided this morning as partners that we're going to offer up internships this summer. They're going to be remote internships. You're going to be working personally with a partner of the agency. So we're going to do our best to mentor you remotely. It's going to be in design. It's going to be in copywriting. It's going to be in account management. We're also going to pay. It's going to be $15 an hour. So you can kind of stay home and keep doing the thing you're doing now, but actually get paid for it. But if anybody is interested in this, we're going to open up this email, inquiries at welcometruth.com. Send me your info. We're going to open up to a lot of people, and I wish we could offer 200 of these, but we only have so much work and so much money to go around right now. So any little bit we can do, hopefully can help. So please feel free to reach out. So I guess with that, I can open it up to thoughts and questions. Thanks, guys.
That's awesome. That was super helpful, Jim. I think I learned a couple of things in there and I've been working in this industry for a while. I think, like, before we jump into questions, one of the insights that I thought was especially applicable to this group, having looked through a lot of resume sites or portfolio sites, was this idea to lead with the work, lead with what you are trying to kind of put forth as, here's what I do really, really well. I think it's a natural inclination to start with the about page that drives to a portfolio. But so many of the examples that you showed were just, let me see the work first, and then I'll go to the about if I'm interested in that.
No, it's exactly. And I'll tell you, if it is a creative director having that first pass, they may spend 15 seconds on your work. And people can tell really quickly whether or not you'd be a good fit at their agency. Look, I can tell when it's student work, but like I said, I'm looking for the idea. The other thing that I'll typically do is, I might go to somebody's site and they might have a pro sports team. They may have a sneaker account. They may have a car account. I'm going to look at that like industrial cleaner. I'm looking for the most difficult brief or the most difficult client that they have in that work. And I'm going to see, is that work any good, right? Because look, we all love to get the big sexy jobs, but the reality is that's not your job, especially just starting out. You may get the work that nobody else wants to do. And I want to see what you can do with it, right? The best work can often be done on the jobs that nobody else wants, because that's your opportunity to do something that nobody else has done before.
Worked on toilet paper for like 3 years, so that's
Yeah.
good. I should have been putting that front and center.
Yeah, I did Microsoft business to business work for 6 years. Trust me. If I could make anything out of that.
Okay, so in terms of questions, I want to let you guys chime in yourselves. So go ahead and use the hand raise feature if you'd like to ask a question, and I'll do my best to navigate the unmute problem here. All right. Jillian, I'm unmuting you. Go ahead and ask your question.
Awesome, thank you. First off, thank you so much for the presentation. I definitely learned a lot and it was really enjoyable too. I wanted to ask about video-based portfolios. I come from a really video-heavy background, and most of the time I see a lot of Vimeos or YouTube channels in place of portfolios. I've kind of strayed towards creating a website just because I have a lot of standalone videos, and while I have a few campaigns, a lot of my projects have been just video elements by itself. So I want to hear your thoughts on what the best way to navigate a portfolio for that is. should I opt for Vimeo instead, or maybe stick with the website?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I don't know why so many people went to Vimeo. I mean, maybe it's the video quality. It might be because that's what a lot of production houses use to stage their work for clients and password protect it. Look, Vimeo and YouTube are fine. Because again, I'm judging you on the quality of your work, not, the medium that it's housed in. And I can know with, I can be pretty sure that YouTube is going to work, right? If YouTube is not up, I'm not going to blame you. I may come back to it later. I've seen plenty of bespoke sites, sites that people built on their own that didn't work for whatever reason when they sent it to me. And if that's the case, and it's not, a commercial site, I might question whether or not you have the abilities to do the job, right? So I wouldn't, personally, I wouldn't hold it against anybody. Again, every creative director is going to be different, but I think YouTube's fine for video.
Awesome. Before we move on to the next one, I know that we're coming close on time. So if anybody has to duck out, feel free to. I think there are a lot of us that will probably stick around for a little bit longer, but Jim's assignment will be posted in the subreddit later tonight. So just look out for that sticky post, and we'll have a submission thread then for work starting on Wednesday.
And I'll do my best to answer questions on there as well.
And we'll share all those resources that Jim shared with you. You'll see those in the thread. I know there was a question about the book he mentioned, so we'll be sure to do that. Mm-hmm. Actually, Ping has a really good question in the chat. Sorry to take the reins, Joe, but I'll read it.
Yeah, go for it.
Any portfolio tips for strategists, account executives, not the creative teams? And Aristotle has asked media planners too.
Look, if you go take media planners, for example, if you go to media agencies, a lot of times they're going to be showcasing their creativity of how they planned campaigns and where their campaigns are placed on their websites. So I know a lot of work in media planning or strategists or behind the scenes. You can't necessarily share a confidential presentation to the world. But again, what I want to know is what was the insight that you brought to the creative team, and how was that translated into the work, and how well did the work perform, right? If you can show results, especially in those areas, it's going to speak to your professionalism. So don't be afraid to show the campaigns. Again, you played a really important role in that. Don't feel like it just all has to be, stuff that was up here. Just because you didn't design it or write it doesn't mean you didn't help make it. So, I think the hardest thing oftentimes that, people in those roles have and that they struggle with is they feel, well, I'm not a designer. I can't make the work look good, or, I can't build a website, or, whatever the reason is. Look, it's easy enough to use a tool like a Squarespace and use a template on there to upload some JPEGs of work, to add some of your own exposition about it. That's just as relevant as a designer's portfolio, as far as I'm concerned. And like I said, you're going to be in very rarefied air if that's your portfolio, because, other people aren't going to have books like that. Trying to get a job in that role.
I'll hand the moderation back to Joe. I see there's just some add-ons for comms planners. Brandon, you might want to kind of include the messaging hierarchy and kind of the different kind of platforms that you're issued and add-ups. You're going to kind of lean into the data there. If you're a producer, you might kind of talk about the challenge that went to the production. Producers all have great portfolios. And with that, I'll hand it back to Joe to moderate. Sorry about that.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, just one thing I wanted to touch on there too, because you guys are asking good questions about very specific roles. Some of you may not know exactly what role you want to go into. And hopefully this course helps you kind of discover that. But that's going to be, that is also going to be one of the really important things in getting a job. That resume that I got today said that they're looking for a job in advertising, right? They just graduated from school and they're looking for a job in advertising. There's 100 different roles in advertising. I have no idea if they're a writer, if they're an account executive, whatever they might be. Unfortunately, a lot of programs graduate students like this that get out of school and they're like, great, I'm going to get into branding. And I say, what do you want to do? And they're like, well, I want to be a designer. Well, do you have any design background? No. Unfortunately, you may have to go to graduate school, right? You may have to study art if you want that job. But if you're having trouble breaking in and you haven't settled on, at least a general area that you want to work within, I'd really encourage you to explore that.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Okay, dude, I'm the worst. I'm gonna mess up this name so bad. Adetunji, maybe ish. I'm gonna unmute you.
Everyone, thank you. You tried. It's Adetunji. So I was going to ask about the strategist portfolio as well, but just because you've kind of answered that, let me just take it back and ask, what about strategists who have not done any work with a creative team? Some strategist who's trying to become a strategist or, just haven't worked in an ad agency yet. How do they present their portfolio for a potential agency or creative director, whoever, to get them on board? What would you want to see?
Again, a great question, and you're right. That's a very difficult situation to come right out of the gate with a portfolio. I think a lot of times what I've seen in cases like this are student projects where especially if you have a chance to hook up with 4A's type advertising club. They often have classes for aspiring strategists to work together as a team and come up with and present strategies, just specific strategies, not actual creative work. And that becomes work that you can share within a portfolio, just showing, theoretical insight into a particular client. What happens in a lot of cases like that is a client will give several teams an assignment, a fake assignment, and they'll work through it and they'll work with a mentor to present over time. Now that's a more formalized program, but that's always something you can do on your own as well. Pick a product that's out there that you feel is not being advertised well. Write a brief about your own particular insight into that audience and what might resonate with them and what you think the unique selling proposition might be, or the key message, or the support points. If this is all another language to you, I'd just encourage you to look up things like creative briefs and look for good examples of those. I know I've seen Goodbee briefs in the past. Goodbee does great briefs, and I've seen examples of those online. That's something that can be a starting point to kind of brainstorming a strategic framework that you can present. A little tougher to show more visually, but even having just one image can convey an idea, right? So people are really just going to be looking at you for your thinking at that point.
I see this in the chat, and I would just add to that this I really like this guy Julian Cole as well, for strategists looking for portfolios and like kind of how strategists present their thinking. I haven't seen anybody market on LinkedIn better than that guy, so we'll include that in the resources here as well. All right, I think
Aristotle, I'm going to answer. If there's a question in the chat that's quick and easy, I can just answer it. So Joe, maybe there's time for one or two more questions from people who are raising their hands.
Yeah, I was going to say we should do maybe two more questions here. Dan, so you're going to answer in the chat, or you want to? Okay.
Yeah, I'll answer in the chat. And maybe going forward, guys, if you have like a really quick question, you could just ping it here. But otherwise, I'll let Joe moderate. Sorry for stepping on your toes.
No. And Joffrey, good call out on Julian Cole there. Okay. Brandon Jones, I'm gonna unmute you for your question.
Okay, sweet. So it's kind of going off of the last question a little bit, but so let's say you were trying to leverage a strategy portfolio to enter an industry that's not an agency. So I want to do the same thing, but for the music industry. In what way could you position that portfolio if you've never worked with any artists?
Right. Oh, yeah. Boy, that's a tough one too, because I've University of the Arts in Philadelphia has a program specifically for music promotion, and I've been called in to judge their portfolios for that program, and oftentimes, you know, the professors there are assigning them different artists, and they have to do research on those artists. And they have to strategize, you know, how they could approach a campaign for that particular artist. So, you know, that could be a way to pursue that. You know, I remember one semester they were given obscure African-American jazz artists and somebody that they had never heard of. And they had to go and do research and kind of strategize a whole campaign around those artists. You know,
do you possibly still have access to any of those
I don't,
campaigns?
yeah, because I was unfortunately just called in as a reviewer for the portfolios. But you know, typically, you know, they would spend the whole semester kind of building out a campaign direction, not creatively but strategically, how they would approach those artists. But yeah, you're talking about a very niche industry. You know, unfortunately, I don't have a background in music promotion, and I wouldn't be the one hiring you. So it would be tough to talk to what I'd actually hire you for. But you know, if you don't have a background in that, it's just a matter of, you know, finding things that you're interested in, and or finding artists that would be a challenge for you and strategizing against them. Right? Somebody just mentioned it, Dan. It was you. You know, write your own briefs and solve your own problems. That's what I had to do for my first portfolio. There was like a local bird sanctuary that I knew nothing about. And I said, but this is the type of job that I might be given if I'm at an agency. So I just jumped in, learned everything I could about it, and started brainstorming ideas. That's what you have to do when you have nothing else to go on.
And maybe another piece of your previous advice of reaching out to people, right? Like it's all about relationships. Like if there's a way for you to get coffee with somebody, which, you know, I feel like just about everybody that I know in the industry is happy to grab coffee with a new person if you're willing to trek to them. So that might be another way to just kind of, you know, on top of building the portfolio, making human connections, because I think that's another important part of what Jim's recommending to all of us.
Yeah.
Jasmine, I'm gonna unmute you for the last question here. So no pressure, but better be good. Oh.
Okay, can everyone hear me? I think
there you are.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Hi. First, I just want to thank you for the lecture. It was great. I wanted to ask, I know like times are really weird right now. We're going through a lot of changes. So how do you stay inspired? Like, do you have any book or podcast that you've been keeping up with?
You know, it's funny. You know, in this industry, we use everything for inspiration, right? I think the people that are drawn to these types of careers, it's never any one artist, director, author that, you know, you go to as like your muse or your constant source. You know, I still to this day will go back. You know, if I'm just looking for inspiration, I'll go back to, you know, some of the classics in this industry. You know, the Doyle Dane Bernbachs of the world, the Paula Scherers of Pentagram, the Fallon McElligots. You know, the great work that they did decades ago. and just reverse engineer things. Why is this work good? Why was it considered good at the time? Because even though they didn't have all the mediums that we have to work within, they still had to start with an idea. And I'm the type of person that I like to take things apart and figure out how they work. And that to me is what design is. That's what copywriting is. That's what, great video is just getting to some basic human insight. And one person's inspiration is going to be completely different for somebody else. I've read a ton of industry books and blogs and everything else. I can't say that there's one go-to. I still lament the day that Google Reader closed down, because I probably had 100 blogs that I used to follow and can't anymore. I still use Feedly, if anybody even does RSS feeds anymore. But, I still look for that type of inspiration from writers out there. But it can come from any source. It's a non-answer.
It's funny. No, I've actually thought about this a lot. The best creatives I know, they consume so much content. They consume so much culture. They listen to so much music. They're like on the forefront. And I know that's like not a super satisfactory answer, but like the time that you spend on Netflix, the time you spend on Spotify, the time you spend going to museums, like all of that can be used. Like just make yourself a student of the world and just like be hungry for everything. I wish I had a better answer, but it's just like for me, and maybe other creatives, can share that. That would be a great idea. It's just like consume information, consume content, not too much because it can send you spinning. A doctor recently asked me in a checkup, he's like, how much information are you consuming? But I guess it's important to consume the right information and one that makes you feel better, especially in times like these, where we're kind of all looking to keep our chins up,
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, I think that was super enlightening for me. Jim, do you want to give like an overview of the assignment? Sorry, I've got a car farting outside.
Yeah, hopefully it's a pretty simple one. For those of you, if you either have your own portfolio site already, or if you're looking to build one, one of the most important components of that, as I touched on with Nick Vicente's site, is the About page. We all sometimes struggle with talking about ourselves. So, rather than challenge people to go out and build an entire portfolio from scratch, I would encourage you to maybe look into a simple site like a Squarespace and take that first step in starting a site, or at the very least, writing that About page about yourself. If you already have one, it's great. Take it, put it aside, and try doing something completely from scratch. My LinkedIn profile is, a little long in the tooth at this point and could probably stand a refresh. And, I know as a writer, sometimes, you might have your, things that you hold sacred, but sometimes it's a good exercise to just forget that you've ever done them and try something new. So that's the assignment. Write about yourself and tell the world about why you matter.
And I think part of what we're hoping this means is either starting a new kind of Squarespace page that then could house some of the assignments and work that you guys do through the course here. If you guys have portfolio pages that you really like and use already, we're not saying like go delete that, but try something fresh here. Like let's just see what happens if we all kind of like start a new About page and maybe try to reframe our work based on what Jim has taught us and what we'll learn kind of through the other speakers through the course.
And think about this as an opportunity for the next 12 weeks to kind of house your creative projects. We really love the idea of this is the first course because we're kind of setting the foundation for everything you'll learn and everything you'll share. And yeah, Joe, I'll let you cap it off.
Yeah, well, thank you guys again for joining. I don't know, Jim, do you have any closing notes? You got it all?
Oh, like I said, hopefully this was helpful. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for jumping into it. again, especially considering the circumstances. But if people have additional questions and everybody's participating in the thread, I'll try to as well.
Awesome. That thread will go up, like we said, tonight with the outline of the assignment and this recording of this. That'll be kind of meta because I'm saying it on the recording too. And then on Wednesday, we will have a fresh thread for you guys to post what you've made. And so the goal here is, you'll be considered as having graduated from our advertising school if you complete 10 of the 12 assignments over the course of the kind of schedule here. This is obviously a pretty foundational one, so would definitely encourage you to go through the exercise because it's super valuable. And with that, we'll end our first class. Bye, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, guys.
Yeah, everyone.